Prior to the arrival of spoken words among humans, another form of interaction already existed, and that earlier method sustained survival, enabled group coordination, and laid down the groundwork for every language in use across the world today. A question that rarely receives attention concerns the precise activities of people before speech developed. Communication in that era depended on facial features and simple vocal noises as the main available tools. Early humans managed to convey alerts about a predator, such as a lion approaching from behind, through non-spoken means alone. This subject forms the core of the present examination. The actual nature of that earlier system turns out more unusual, detailed, and effective than most observers tend to expect. Begin with a capacity already familiar, yet seldom examined in depth. At this moment, without any movement of the mouth, a person can convey annoyance. Signals of confusion, suspicion, delight, or strong disapproval can all pass without a single spoken sound. Eyebrows handle part of the work, posture handles another part, and a subtle tightening near the eyes handles still more. None of this arises by chance. It represents ancient biological equipment. The human face contains 43 muscles, a higher number than nearly every other animal species possesses. The great majority of those muscles serve expression rather than chewing or breathing. Evolution constructed a signaling device from flesh and bone long before language appeared. Investigators examining facial displays across different societies have uncovered a notable pattern. Fundamental expressions remain consistent worldwide. Fear presents the same appearance in remote areas of Papua New Guinea as it does in central Tokyo. Disgust registers identically, whether observed in the Amazon rainforest or a suburban district of Norway. Happiness, anger, sadness, and surprise likewise operate as innate signals rather than acquired habits. Paul Ekman, a psychologist who devoted decades to charting the human face, identified brief involuntary flashes of emotion lasting under 1/5 of a second that he termed micro-expressions. Full voluntary control over them remains impossible. They emerge even during deliberate attempts to conceal internal states. These flashes constitute evolutionary products rather than cultural inventions. Consequently, ancestral populations already exchanged and interpreted emotional information through this channel millions of years prior to the first spoken utterance. The significance lies in the active nature of facial expression. It functions as more than a mere byproduct of internal feeling. Natural selection shaped it as a signal because it aided coordination of group actions. An individual able to transmit an immediate warning of danger across a campsite without generating noise that might draw a predator gained a clear survival edge. The same advantage applied to anyone capable of reading that signal accurately and responding within half a second. Communication did not originate with language. Language merely enhanced an existing system. Shift attention much further back, prior to Homo sapiens, and even prior to immediate ancestral forms. Roughly 6 million years ago, the evolutionary line leading to modern humans diverged from the line leading to chimpanzees. Observation of present-day chimpanzees reveals patterns that appear strikingly recognizable. They produce deliberate gestures carrying clear purpose. One chimpanzee extends an arm with palm upward in a request gesture. Another touches the shoulder of a companion to begin grooming. A wave of the arm solicits play. A particular beckoning motion invites a second individual to follow. Critically, these gestures occur only when the performer can observe the face of the recipient. Eye contact is awaited. A gesture is repeated if it meets no response. The action ceases once a reply arrives. This pattern does not reflect automatic instinct. It demonstrates purposeful communication. Investigators at the University of Standrews documented more than 80 separate gestures employed by wild chimpanzees and determined that a substantial share of them retained consistent meanings across separate communities, including communities that had never interacted. This distribution indicates that the gestures predate the current populations and may even predate the species. Bonobos display the same capacity. Gorillas and orangutans do likewise. The gestural repertoire among great apes reaches a high level of complexity and strongly indicates that ancestral forms already possessed a working system of intentional signals well before any spoken word emerged. Human infants likewise communicate by gesture prior to speech. Around the age of 9 months, before genuine language appears, infants begin to point. They raise objects to display them. They stretch toward desired items. They wave. These actions follow a precise developmental order that parallels patterns observed in other great apes. Pointing holds particular interest because most animal species cannot perform it. A dog raised for an entire lifetime will gaze at a pointing finger rather than at the indicated object. Human infants point in order to share attention rather than solely to request objects. That difference carries weight. The gestural origin hypothesis of language, one of the principal proposals within linguistics, maintains that language did not begin in the mouth. It began with the hands, and vocal elements arrived later as an addition to an already functioning system. A neurological observation supports this view as well. The brain region most closely linked to language production, known as Broca area, occupies the same broad zone that governs precise movements of the hands and mouth. The region is not a language center that merely happens to lie near motor control areas. It may instead represent a motor planning zone later recruited for language use. The hands established the pathway. The mouth later adapted to travel along it. Gesture, however, requires mutual visibility, and early humans frequently operated in conditions of restricted sight. Travel through thick forest, activity during darkness, and dispersal across landscapes where direct line of sight could not be assured all created gaps. Another channel, therefore, had to supply the missing capacity. Sound filled that role, yet not language and not words, merely sound. Prior to words, calls already existed. Vocalizations transmitted, meaning through acoustic qualities rather than through grammar or vocabulary. Pitch, rhythm, intensity, and sound pattern all contributed. Every primate species maintains a call system, and these systems can reach surprising levels of specificity. Vervet monkeys are well known for distinct alarm calls corresponding to different predator types. One call signals eagles and prompts the group to rush into undergrowth. A separate call signals snakes and causes individuals to rise and examine the ground. A third call signals leopards and drives the group into the trees. Within the same species and the same group, 3 different sounds produce 3 different behavioral reactions. The calls are context-specific, consistent, and functionally referential. In other words, the call does more than express the emotional condition of the caller. It points to an external object or event. This arrangement does not equal language, yet it is far from empty. It occupies an intermediate position, a set of signals that conveys information beyond the raw emotion of the individual producing the sound. Ancestral humans almost certainly possessed a comparable system, probably more elaborate than that of vervets, given the millions of years of accumulating social complexity within the human lineage. As group sizes increased, as social rankings grew more intricate, and as cooperative hunting demanded finer coordination, the evolutionary pressure for more precise communication intensified. The actual sound of early Homo remains genuinely unknown. The larynx does not preserve in fossils. Soft tissues responsible for speech leave no archaeological imprint. Inferences can nevertheless be drawn from skeletal anatomy. The location of the hyoid bone, a small U-shaped structure in the throat, provides clues about vocal capacity. Neanderthals possessed a hyoid bone nearly identical to the modern human form, indicating they almost certainly held the physical ability for complex vocalizations. Whether those vocalizations constituted language in a full sense continues to be debated, yet the anatomical equipment was present. An additional point about Neanderthals deserves longer consideration than it usually receives. They buried their dead. They produced pigments. Evidence shows they wore eagle talons as personal ornaments. These actions do not belong to beings with nothing to communicate. They belong to beings managing a rich social environment that almost certainly depended on some form of symbolic signaling for its maintenance. Consider next a feature that receives insufficient recognition: rhythm. Prior to words, beat already existed. Rhythm ranks among the most ancient and universal elements of human communication. Every documented human culture possesses music. Every documented human culture employs drumming, clapping, or some other rhythmic practice. This distribution is not accidental. Rhythm is deeply woven into social bonding in a manner difficult to account for without evolutionary explanation. When humans synchronize their movements, when they walk in unison, drum together, or sing together, a neurological change occurs. Oxytocin levels rise. Pain thresholds increase. Group cohesion improves in measurable ways. Military units march in formation for this reason. Religious ceremonies incorporate chanting for this reason. Concerts produce their characteristic effect for this reason. Shared rhythm signals belonging. It communicates that the participants form a unit, that they move as one, and that they can be relied upon. No language was required for this process. Given that the capacity for rhythmic entrainment, the automatic ability to match an external beat, appears in humans by default, while remaining largely absent in other primates, the pattern suggests a significant and specialized adaptation within the human line. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar, known for the social brain hypothesis, has proposed that early music and rhythmic vocalization may have served as a form of grooming at a distance. In primate societies, physical grooming constitutes the main mechanism of social bonding. Grooming, however, occurs between pairs. As group sizes expanded, it became impossible to maintain cohesion through one-on-one grooming within a community of 150 individuals. A method capable of bonding many individuals at once became necessary. Collective singing, collective movement, and collective drumming supplied that method. Sound functioned as social adhesive. This proposal no longer occupies a marginal position. Support comes from neuroscience, primatology, and anthropology. The communicative role of rhythm among early humans may have equaled the importance of any gestural or more referential vocal channel. The oldest known musical instruments, bone flutes, recovered from European sites date to at least 40,000 years ago. Absence of older instruments does not imply absence of older music. Percussion requires no specialized tools. Hands striking hollow logs, stones struck against each other, and feet striking hard ground all produce rhythm. Every human who ever lived had access to these means. The neurological reaction to rhythm indicates use extending far beyond 40,000 years. Turn now to the body itself. Posture communicates, and has done so for as long as bodies capable of adopting postures have existed. Expanding the body when threatened, contracting it when yielding to a dominant individual, presenting a shoulder, turning away, and lowering the head are not symbolic acts. They are biologically legible. Other animals interpret them accurately. Humans interpret them accurately as well. Early humans living in complex social groups would have employed postural and proxemic signals, the study of spatial use in communication, constantly and with fluency. Proximity between individuals, orientation of the body during conflict, occupation of central space versus retreat to the margins, all establish hierarchy, indicate alliance, and convey threat or submission without any vocal sound. Touch plays a role here as well. Tactile communication concerning who may touch whom, where, and under what circumstances ranks among the most basic and potent channels of social information. A hand placed on the shoulder carries a different meaning from a hand placed on the head. A brief tap differs from a prolonged grip. Across cultures and even across species, the meanings of touch remain remarkably stable. They are pre-linguistic and therefore older than words. All of these elements, gesture, posture, touch, and space, fall under the modern research category of nonverbal communication. That label is somewhat misleading because it presents these systems as secondary to verbal communication, as if they represent residual material that failed to enter language. In fact, these systems are primary. They preceded language. They remain more reliable in certain situations, harder to counterfeit in certain respects, and they continue to carry a large informational burden, even among adults fully fluent in language. Research repeatedly demonstrates that when verbal and nonverbal signals conflict, people rely on the nonverbal channel without exception. An individual who states that everything is satisfactory while speaking in a flat tone with arms folded and gaze directed elsewhere will not be believed. The body is trusted instead. This response is not irrational. It reflects an ancient system correctly overriding a more recent and more easily altered one. Humans did not abandon the older system upon acquiring language. Language was layered onto it, and both systems operate simultaneously in every interaction between two people. An additional element that often escapes notice in these discussions is smell. Humans are frequently characterized as possessing a weak sense of smell relative to other mammals, and in absolute terms that characterization holds. A dog inhabits an olfactory world far beyond ordinary human reach. That framing, however, overlooks an important capacity. Humans display extreme sensitivity to particular chemical signals that transmit social information. Fear can be detected by smell in a literal rather than metaphorical sense. Research has established that compounds present in the sweat of genuinely frightened individuals produce measurable alterations in the physiological and neural states of those who inhale them, even when the recipients consciously regard the sample as ordinary sweat. The signal bypasses conscious awareness and proceeds directly to threat response systems. Stress can be smelled. Disease can be smelled. Individuals suffering certain illnesses release detectable chemical markers that healthy people can, under some conditions, identify. Genetic compatibility can be smelled. Classic studies involving worn T-shirts demonstrated that people consistently judge the odor of individuals possessing sufficiently different immune system profiles as more attractive. Evolution thereby performs mate selection calculations without informing the conscious mind. Early humans living in close physical contact, sleeping in shared spaces, moving in compact groups, and handling common materials would have been continuously immersed in olfactory social data. Exact reconstruction of how much of this information entered conscious awareness versus remaining below the threshold of notice is impossible. Yet the continued activity and influence of these chemosensory systems on modern human behavior, even in an age of deodorant and physical separation, indicate that their earlier role was substantial. Smell does not function as a precise messaging system. A question cannot be smelled, nor can an argument. As a continuous broadcast of emotional condition, physiological status, and genetic data, however, it almost certainly formed a constant background channel of social communication that early humans navigated with ease. Proceed now to a more tangible topic: proto-language. At a certain stage, the distance between ancestral practices consisting of calls, gestures, rhythm, and expression, and what would be recognized as language began to narrow. The timing, the mechanism, and the appearance of intermediate stages remain open questions. The candid response is that exact knowledge is unavailable. Language produces no fossils. Available evidence consists of proxy indicators, including skull shapes that suggest brain organization, hyoid bones that suggest vocal anatomy, and most importantly, stone tools. The tool-making traditions of early Homo provide, in an unexpected manner, a window onto cognitive and possibly communicative abilities. Oldowan tools, the earliest identifiable stone implements dating back approximately 2.6 million years, are comparatively simple. A stone is struck with deliberate blows to produce a sharp edge. The result is not trivial yet, neither is it complex. The Acheulean hand axe, appearing around 1.76 million years ago, differs in an important respect. It demands planning. The maker must maintain a mental image of the intended form, make decisions several steps ahead of the present action, and perform a sequence of precise movements directed toward a goal not immediately visible. This capacity constitutes hierarchical sequential cognition, the same cognitive structure that supports syntax. The same structure operates when a sentence is constructed in which each word choice both limits and is limited by what precedes and follows it. The cognitive foundations required for language hierarchical planning, symbolic thought, and working memory for sequences appear to have assembled over an extended period before anything recognizable as language emerged. By the appearance of Homo sapiens, roughly 300,000 years ago, the brain had already been molded by millions of years of social complexity, gestural communication, vocal communication, and progressively refined tool production. The neurological groundwork for language was therefore probably already largely complete before language in its familiar form existed. This observation opens an intriguing possibility. The emergence of language may not have demanded a major neurological transformation. It may instead have resembled the final piece of a puzzle settling into position. A modest alteration, perhaps, in the neural circuits governing voluntary vocalization, or in the working memory systems that permit longer sequences to be retained and manipulated, unlocked the remaining capacities. The transition was not from silence to elaborate literature. It was from a rich, multi-layered, multi-channel communication system to that same system augmented by grammar. Once grammar appeared, the capacity to combine a limited set of signals into an unlimited set of meanings, everything accelerated. One further topic merits examination: the function of teaching. Communication serves more than the transmission of information in the immediate moment. One of its most potent roles is the transmission of information across time, from one generation to the next. Evidence indicates that early humans performed this function long before language simplified the process. Imitation constitutes one mechanism. Observation of a skilled individual performing a complex task, followed by copying, refinement, and improvement across generations, represents a form of cultural transmission that requires no words. Humans excel at this process to an extraordinary degree. Human imitation differs qualitatively from the imitation observed in other animals. Humans copy the method rather than merely the result. They reproduce the exact actions employed to achieve an outcome, even when alternative methods would succeed equally well. This tendency is termed over-imitation, and it is so firmly established that children will replicate clearly superfluous steps within a demonstrated sequence because they assume those steps must carry significance. This behavioral pattern enables culture to accumulate. A technique invented by one individual can be retained, refined by a group, and passed to the following generation without complete verbal description. The form itself conveys the information. Observation is followed by copying, improvement, and further transmission. Scaffolded demonstration, in which a skilled individual guides a learner through a process by pointing, redirecting, and repeating, would have operated as a teaching system before language. It continues to operate in this manner in many present-day settings. Observation of an experienced sushi chef instructing an apprentice, or of a basketball player teaching a crossover dribble, reveals that a large portion of the instruction remains physical, demonstrative, and nonverbal. Language assists, yet it does not accomplish the entire task. There is a notable quality to this process. Early human knowledge concerning how to shape a stone, how to interpret animal tracks, and which plants served as medicine versus which plants caused death persisted for hundreds of thousands of years before anyone could record it in writing or even fully express it in speech. It persisted in bodies, in hands that had observed other hands and learned to move identically, and in the accumulated muscle memory of a species that practiced teaching long before formal teachers existed. The rise of more explicit symbolic communication, first as proto-language and then as full language, would have greatly increased both the efficiency and the accuracy of this knowledge transfer. Absent objects could be described. Events in the past and the future could be discussed. The reasons underlying a technique could be explained rather than merely the method demonstrated. Warnings could be issued about dangers not yet encountered. Collective mourning for the deceased became possible. Plans extending beyond the immediate horizon could be formed. These advantages probably explain a large share of the spread and deepening of language once it appeared, not solely because language aided immediate interaction, but because it greatly amplified the cultural accumulation that underlies human civilization. The overall conclusion is as follows. Human communication prior to speech was not rudimentary. It was not a preliminary sketch. It constituted a sophisticated multi-channel system that coordinated groups numbering dozens or hundreds, managed complex social hierarchies, transmitted emotional states and threat information in real time, and constructed the cultural framework upon which language later arose. The face already broadcast signals. The hands already produced gestures. The voice already generated calls carrying referential meaning. The body already conveyed status and alliance information. Smell already filtered social data beneath conscious awareness. Rhythm already united groups in ways that pairwise interaction could not achieve. Language did not displace this system. It joined the system. Every conversation conducted today operates simultaneously on ancient pre-linguistic channels: the facial expression, the bodily posture, the rhythm of speech, the presence or absence of touch, and on the more recently evolved channel of words and grammar. When a stranger is assessed for trustworthiness, within a fraction of a second, the older system is performing its function. When the atmosphere of a room changes before any words are spoken, the older system is at work. When a falsehood is detected, even though the spoken words were technically accurate, the older system has registered the inconsistency across channels. The words conveyed one message, while the face, the voice, the timing, and the posture conveyed another, and the listener ancient equipment identified the mismatch before conscious processing of the sentence was complete. Humans are not beings who exchanged nonverbal communication for language. Humans are beings who added language to a nonverbal foundation and continue to operate on both. When the perspective is widened sufficiently, the entire sequence becomes a matter worth careful reflection. A lineage of animals, distributed across millions of years, gradually constructed an increasingly complex system for bridging the gap between one mind and another. It began with a face capable of broadcasting fear. Hands capable of pointing and gesturing were added. Voices capable of carrying information across distance were added. Rhythm, capable of drawing individuals into synchrony, was added. Imitation, capable of transferring knowledge across generations, was added. Eventually, the capacity that allowed one mind to describe the contents of another mind to a person who was absent, who was not present, and who did not witness the event was added. That capacity is what is now called language. Consequently, every instance of communication without words, every shrug, every glance, every intentional silence, does not represent a failure of communication. It represents a return to the oldest form of human identity. It constitutes speech in a language so ancient that it possesses no name, a language refined across millions of years of survival, cooperation, and all intervening experience. And for the most part, the intended message